And I've got a very good set of speakers today. If I may just start to introduce them. Today, for this session, I've got Mr. Professor Amal Kumarage, who will sort of give us a keynote address for this session. He is presently the chairman at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport of Sri Lanka. He's got a broad array of experience in this sector over 30 years, from academia, government, and consultation, consulting World Bank, ADB, etc. He's done a lot of publications around transportation, transport planning, public transport, traffic engineering, road safety, urban transport, and many more. So I'm grateful to have him. He's a well-known figure in Sri Lankan transportation. Then from the US, I've got Samita Samaranayaka joining here as well. He's assistant professor, School of Civil and Engineering, Environmental Engineering at Cornell University. Samita is a assistant professor in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Cornell, with graduate field faculty affiliations in operations and research and information engineering at the Center of Applied Mathematics and System Engineering. Prior to joining Cornell, he was a postdoctoral associate at the Laboratory of Information and Decision Making at MIT. So we've got Samita, and then we've also got Winnie Wang. Miss Winnie Wang is a senior transport specialist with the World Bank Group. In 2019, she relocated to Colombo from Washington, DC, in charge of transportation sector portfolio management in Sri Lanka and Maldives. Professionally trained in transportation planning, she has worked in urban transport, roads, railways, and logistics across countries in North America, Europe, and Asia. Prior to joining World Bank, she worked at Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority for metro rail planning and transport for London for intermodal transport planning. Ms. Wang is a graduate from MIT. She currently resides in Colombo with her family. And then, of course, I'm very happy to have Mr. Monty Ranatunga, who's the secretary to the Ministry of Transport. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining in for this session at the Sri Lanka Internet Day. For the audience that are connected, please use the Q&A session. I'll be monitoring and I'll be moderating the questions here. So please do send in your questions, and we will have those questions posed to our eminent speakers. To set the stage, I'd like to invite Professor Amal to give us the keynote address. Professor Amal, over to you.
Thank you, Sulfa. And good afternoon or evening to all of you who are out in Cyberland. And just a tiny correction, I hold many positions right now, but not that of the chairman of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. And that was like 6 years ago. But thank you for that introduction. And I'm very pleased to be here to share some ideas with you for what I deem to be a very important topic for today's age. As a keynote address for this short session, I have not opted to impress you with all the different developments that are going ahead right now across the world. There are many and many success stories, many applicable solutions, and we can talk about more of those. And I'm sure Professor Samaranayaka will be in a better position, as well as Ms. Winnie Wang, to talk about global applications. What I thought I would do is basically to stretch our minds a bit about why we need these things, why we need them now. We are fairly familiar with issues of transport in developing countries, particularly in Colombo and other major cities. And why is it that we have got here? and what can digital solutions do for us here in this country. And in the second part of my address, I also want to share a few things as to what I feel are the reasons why we have not been able to proceed in this very important area. So let me start off with a short historical presentation. Now, we know that transportation is going through the third revolution now. The first being the industrial age, the invention of the railway and how the railway was used to build cities, get people to work in factories and transport them over fairly long distances. These generated corridors, high density corridors that served first the railways, then other forms of public transport all over the world. And that is how cities developed in the 19th century, and it pretty much stayed that way till the middle part of the 20th century. Now, one of the inventions of the 20th century that has altered life tremendously is motorization. And from transport point of view, the 20th century is the age of the motor car. It revolutionized the way in which mobility happened. Now, around cities, we had these high density corridors. But as more and more people settled along these, they had to commute further away. Land prices around the corridors became expensive, and people went into the hinterlands away from the corridors to live and reside. And therefore, getting to the corridors became more and more challenging, because urban transport is not so good when population density is less. So people started using private cars to commute to work. And these gradually started clogging up the main arteries and taking more and more people off public transport into private cars. And you know what we have, and that is called congestion, where we now have more cars, more three-wheelers, motorcycles put together on a road that can handle it at that point in time. So the solution in the latter part of the 20th century has been, okay, let's build more roads. Let's put more trains and more infrastructure, more vehicles. But unfortunately, other than in a few cities that actually opted to do things differently, most cities, including ours in Sri Lanka, have only made the problem worse. So we see that that's really not a solution. It's only feeds more infrastructure, almost feeds more traffic, and the problem remains, perhaps even gets worse. Now, parallel to this, what other cities like Singapore and lately London and many cities in South America and also in East Asia have done is actually to impede that growth by improving their public transport. So therefore, what has happened is that they have improved the quality of public transport. But most cities, access to public transport has waned away. Real-time information has not been accurate or present. The quality assurance has not happened. Reliability of services, safety, security, free of harassment, these have not happened. And availability when you need it to go where you want to go has not been there. So the net result in these places is that not only has it impeded mobility, it has actually deteriorated urban livability. Why? Our roads are clogged. There is more demand, more vehicles than we know what to do. We have taken road space, and even walking or cycling, what we call active mobility, has become a challenge and unsafe as that. We have created a number of social, health, environmental, climate-related issues that we really are struggling to face with. And also for a developing country, our cost of mobility is now in Colombo, in Western Province, it has to be something like 15, 16% of what we produce goes away from mobility, which we can ill afford to waste like that. Now, we have now stepped into the third decade of the 21st century, and the digital age has been with us for quite a while. And many countries, we are beginning to see many countries effectively using this digital age and the technology to bring about solutions for urban transportation. Now, there are many examples, but in terms of concepts, what do we need to do? Let me take an example. Now, I'm sure we have all complained about road congestion. Why? Because demand exceeds capacity. But actually, when you look at it, most roads have enough capacity. We all know that at night, roads are functioning way, way, way below capacity. Even during the day, it is morning, evening, maybe sometimes during the midday, we are under capacity, we are over capacity. So what we have is actually a problem of managing the capacity. Just like we had to manage our electricity, we had to manage our staff, we had to manage many things that vary with demand. We had to know how to vary our supply. And so, I mean, just imagine a situation where you can keep widening the number of lanes as the demand increases. Of course, that can't be done. What we can do is actually to increase the number of people that can travel during that time by increasing the vehicle occupancy or the number of people who will travel in a lane or on that road during the time when the demand is excessive. So now, can we do this with digital intervention? Now we also have gone through many proposals to have flexible work hours, extended work weeks, compressed work weeks, staggered work hours. These have been there for decades now. But we saw a global adoption of that with the pandemic. Now, the technology was there for that to be done. So now can we use that for demand spreading? So we have some external opportunities or enforcements that we can use. We can also use this for better capacity management at intersections to manage parking or lane discipline, which actually eats up into capacity, particularly at peak times. Now, the most important intervention in digital data interventions is to give people choice. People are used to choices. You know, I mean, I can get down food thanks to PickMe and others from I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of restaurants in half an hour. We are used to choice. I suppose we are spoiled for choice. So, but how much choice do we have about our mobility? Now, because we don't have choice, we own our own car because that is the best choice. We can choose where to go, when to go, what time we need to go. But others are unable to give us that choice. Now, can we improve the choice that we have with digital technology? We've seen it happening around us in other sectors. So how do you get real-time data into the hands of people? How do we get different modes, availability of different modes in a single platform? I don't want to look at the bus timetables in one website, use an app to see whether I can get a taxi from this company, and then go to the other company and see whether there's a better taxi, or look at the train timetables. No. We need to move towards not only motorized transport, but even non-motorized like cycling and so on. I think we need to, because people finally need mobility. That is the final product. The means by which you go is just the mode. There was a time of the baby boomers era where how you went mattered very much, particularly if you wanted to drive a car and, you know, But today, I think that generation is going out, and the younger people just want, they are more utilitarian, and they just want to get there. So I think mobility as a service is now coming in a big way. I think people in the IT sector are familiar with this concept of software as a service, storage as a service. Instead of maintaining heavy, burdensome infrastructure, we just get it from whoever has it. Now, if you look at vehicles during the crowded peak hour, and if you count the seats in all of those vehicles and count all the people, do you know what we will have more? We'll have more seats than we have people, even during the peak hour. So what? We have the capacity. It's just that we have not been able to allocate it efficiently. Okay. So how do we get to that? How do we improve things like ride sharing and higher vehicle occupancies by improving high occupancy vehicle usage like vans, buses, and so on? And up to now, we have been thinking that we have to provide more infrastructure. Now we are looking at how do we better utilize what we have. Now, a private car is the most underutilized asset in the country and probably the whole world. 90% of the time, it is idle. Not only is it idle, sometimes you have to pay to keep it idle. Parking. Now, why are we spending so much time building so much infrastructure to safeguard an asset that we are hardly using? So I think with the digital age, we have to start thinking differently, that we are not going to do what we did in the 20th century of just building and providing more and more and more, but now we use what we have more efficiently. And that, I think, is what digital platforms can do today. And with it must come the regulation. Now we have regulators who, what do? Actually, their job is to connect the supplier, will issue a permit, and with the demand through a timetable. And that's horrible. It doesn't happen. Even if there's a timetable, the vehicle doesn't come. So if we can bridge this to real time or near real time, actually we should have moved towards self-regulation and quality assurance. Self-regulation, which can ensure the quality of the product. Now, just quickly, 3 issues of what I feel why we are not going down this path here in Sri Lanka. And I want to have a challenge to everybody, or give a challenge to everybody, I think is around this Zoom webinar. Now, for many years, people I've known and worked with in the IT sector always complain about government not allowing entry into solving these issues. But let's look at what is regulated by government. Let's look at what is unregulated by government. And you can see that public transport, passenger transport is regulated. Approximately 45–50% of trips are there. And in the freight and logistics subsector, rail freight, which is less than 1% of transport, freight transport, is regulated by the railways. Now, the vast majority is actually unregulated. Taxis, three-wheelers, non-motorized transport, office transport, school transport, and of course, private transport, are minimally regulated, only with respect to some degree of safety, right? So where does one begin to enter? Do we always go knocking on government to say, open, deregulate so that we can go in? I've been almost forever trying to persuade IT initiators to go in, solve the freight and logistics industry, which is totally free of regulation. But it hasn't happened so far. The road freight industry, the agricultural perishable commodities, manufacturing commodities, the import-export logistics. I mean, all of these are highly wasteful. The load factors are low, the return haulages are low, and we are paying 2-3 times what we should for haulage of commodities in this country. Why haven't been able to go in there? Not government intervention. There is a bigger problem. Now let's also look at the money that is behind here. Now this is what society by and large, everything included, pays for this subsector. So public transport pays 200 billion. That is what the industry is worth today. So that's one of the biggest industries in this country. But look at the industry of unregulated transport. That's even bigger. People are spending at least 5 times more for non-public transport solutions, which is actually very costly for most families. Even if you look at the freight industry, the railway is just a fraction, but the unregulated is a 250 billion industry. So why can't we go in with solutions? So we need to find the entry of digital solutions into this market. We also have, I think, somewhat, well, maybe I wouldn't say the word backward, but resistance to enter into transport, a resistance in the IT industry. And what I have seen is that they're more comfortable with cut and paste solutions that have worked somewhere else. We just come and, do some cosmetic changes and put it in. No, Sri Lanka's mobility problems are Sri Lanka's mobility problems. We cannot really cut and paste foreign solutions to our local problem. So companies need to develop internal competencies in transport and logistics. I know with our degree program going ahead, transport and logistics, many companies are actually recruiting the specialist graduates to work alongside the IT personnel, the computers, engineers, and so on. And I can see synergies developing, their ability to go into the transport market. And I think this is one of the things that are missing, the ability of IT companies to actually work alongside the mobility experts. Also a hesitation to enter high gain but high risk areas. Okay, now we are bombarded with different proposals for very expensive infrastructure proposal to solve urban congestion. The last I looked at was a $4.3 billion US proposal for an extensive set of LRTs. That is $1 trillion, $1 trillion. Now, if you were given $1 trillion, the IT industry, to reduce congestion in Colombo, isn't that a challenge that people would want to take? $1 trillion, I tell you. Half of that, a quarter of that, a 10% of that. Now, these are maybe risky enters, but this is what we need to actually impress upon decision makers that the digital solutions will work. It's not just putting in expensive infrastructure, which is actually the old paradigm that fits what we need in the 21st century. We have also found people, easily giving way to hardware solutions and not actually fighting to say we can solve it with digitally. I think we also have this inability of the IT sector to actually convince not only government, but even private sector that it's in their interest to improve efficiency. We have this thing that we live in the island, and as long as we are on par with our best competitor, we are fine. We really don't want to improve our game, to the global level. Also, I have seen IT companies wanting quick profits, safe grounds, not willing to actually think of putting out the service first for the common good, and then waiting for the profits to come. So these are some of the things as an academic mostly, I have observed. Finally, a word about government. Now, government is seen as putting roadblocks to IT. And I think one can successfully argue that case. I don't want to waste time talking about that, but how can we help government to do better? How can we convert the roadblock mentality to actually letting down guidelines? And I think having Mr. Ranatunga here is a beacon of hope for the transport industry, because he's one of the most progressive people. If we can't get this done during his tenure, I think people need to exploit that. Let me put it differently. So ministries and governments, we know, are stuck with being the regulator. And the transport ministry, 99% of its energies go into managing the public transport, the CTB and the railways. They have a supplier mentality. They have a regulator mentality. But actually, more and more, we see government role in transport in the developing countries changing from that, which was actually like a 50 years old, to that of a facilitator. Okay, let the private sector come with its supply. Let us be the facilitator. Let us put the guidelines to protect the industry and the people. But we are no longer the gatekeepers. We are no longer, issuing permits and, licenses and, things like that. We open the market so that different people can bring in their supply to meet this demand, but we set the rules for the game. And we need to also move into a more planned and scientific interventionist mindset. We have this push all over government. We want something done quickly. The problem is bad. We want a quick solution. Research, no, it doesn't work here. Planning, no, that's really useless. I think there are no shortcuts. We need to have people who will do this. And also, we need capacity in government to differentiate between good proposals and bad proposals, good plans and bad plans. And that is actually a very difficult task for somebody like Mr. Ranatunga, because I know the problem of capacity has in the institution. Finally, I think the biggest impediment I have seen to digital transformation in the transportation sector has been the IT managers in the sector. And even some of the transport and logistics management in the sector, because their competencies are, well, I would say middle level. They're still way down like in the 20th century. They have a 20th century mentality. And even in the third decade of the 21st century, they still haven't really picked up what is needed for today and for the future. So how do we get beyond them, or how do we carry them with us? And this is the third challenge for government. So Zulfa, I hope I have given enough material for discussion.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think there was a lot of information there, right? I think what sort of excited, or not really excited, but at least what sort of came out there is there's obviously a lot of capital in here, and an opportunity for the tech industry to see what more they could change here, right? So it's very interesting. I mean, with $1 trillion, I think that the tech community would be happy to take up that challenge. So my first question, I think we've got a nice array of speakers here. Obviously, my first question goes to Winnie, right? She's obviously from the development agency. Winnie, in your view, what kind of technical solutions are practical for improving public transport services to better serve the society, especially for the poorer people? And in order to make it happen, what kind of policy, regulatory support is required? Winnie, over to you.
Thank you, Zulfa, and thank you, Professor Amar, for the excellent presentation. Yes, so I would like to also mention the initiative that is taken under the Secretary Monti in Ministry of Transport. I know the government of Sri Lanka has been very actively try to modernize the bus sector, digitalize bus fleet management. That would be very key, such as installing GPS, like Amma mentioned in the presentations. That would be very critical to improve the bus service, give people serve their travel demands much better. I know the government is key on that. In addition, I know we also have been talking about bus route optimization. That's another area I usually call small investments, big returns. As Amma mentioned, we don't really have a good understanding of the travel behaviors for people taking public transport. And there are a lot of congestions, and you see a lot of bus routes running around, not really serving the demand. One thing we could do is to do a bus route optimization. And this is something technology comes also very handy. Instead of traditional, paper service to understand origin destinations, we have a lot of smartphone apps and digital tools that can be used quickly to get a good understanding of where people are from, where people are going. Therefore, we can increase frequency of bus or truncate some services to better serve the travel demand for the commuting people. And we have been doing this kind of analytical work with our grant, even for many countries, including I'm participated in Ukraine, in Bangladesh, in Vietnam. I think Sri Lanka the public transport sector could also benefit from this kind of in-depth understanding of the bus route services. So these two are the immediate quick wins I can think from the technology side for the bus sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. I'd like to now pose the question to Samita. Now, Samita, you've got a broad experience around tech and research and transport. I think you probably be a better person coming from an international perspective. I mean, you grew up in Sri Lanka as well, right? With what you've seen in Sri Lanka, right? How do you see this problem of transportation being fixed?
Thank you, Sofa. Yeah, and I think Professor Kumarage really set the stage here, so that it makes the job easier. So as you said, there's a fundamental problem here, right? So as long as we want to move lots of people around, the only way to stop congestion is to somehow manage it better. Now, we can do so by reducing the demand on the network, but that's not good. We want people to move. This leads to economic activity, social mobility, better public health outcomes, and all sorts of good things for us. So we want people to move, but we want people to move in a more efficient way. And of course, this is, then it becomes a physics problem. If you want more people to move at the same time, then you have to move them more efficiently. And really the only way to do that at scale is through higher capacity modes. And really, technology by itself cannot solve these problems, right? So we are sometimes, even in developing countries, even in the US, there is a mindset that autonomy, electrification, shared mobility, all these kinds of magical technological solutions are going to get rid of congestion. But this is just a fantasy, right? This is not going to happen. The only way we can move people more efficiently is through putting them in higher occupancy modes. And public transit is really the way to go. Now, that doesn't mean there's no role for technology to play. There's in fact a very important role for technology to play, and that is in providing better public transportation. And for some reason, this is not as glamorous, right? So again, the Ubers and Lyfts and Didis and Olas of the world, the focus has been on improving taxi services, right? And having an automated taxi, it's commonly called ride sharing, but in most cases, it's not ride sharing. The same car is moving multiple people, but not at the same time. And that's not going to help our problem. So the challenge I give to the tech sector is to invest in public transit, invest in these modes that are maybe less glamorous, but there's a huge role for technology to play there. And we can get into more details, but maybe I'll stop at that for now.
Yeah, Samita, just going back to you again, can you please tell the audience, I mean, I think you've been in the US for a long time now, since you left here. Can you tell us what kind of research work are you doing in the university?
Sure, yeah. So my original background is in computer science, and I studied an area called operations research, which is the use of mathematics for industrial engineering problems. But about maybe 12 years ago, I decided that I wanted to get into a field of study that was more connected with societal good and problems people face in the real world. And being someone who was interested in networks and algorithms, I thought that transportation was a natural place that had a lot of interesting both mathematical and practical applications. So I've been working in the area of transportation for the last 10 years or so. And more specifically, I work on mathematical modeling and optimization for large-scale transportation network problems. So this could be problems like the algorithms that you see when you go to Google Maps and ask for directions, the types of algorithms that companies like PickMe and Uber use. And more recently, again, to add to what I said earlier, I've been really focused on understanding how we can use mathematical modeling and technology to improve transportation's public transit systems. And there's a lot of really interesting and complicated mathematical problems that are associated with that. And that's my focus at the moment.
All right, thank you. All right, so now I'd like to sort of pose the next question to Mr. Monty. Mr. Monty, I mean, obviously, it's a notion out there that public transport has many opposition for innovation and changes. What do you think needs to be done?
First of all, I must thank you and the organizers for arranging this type of discussions to discuss about the transportation, in particular in Sri Lankan transport. As the Secretary to the Ministry of Transport, actually, I must appreciate Professor Amal Kumarage's the wordings, and also he is helping me to develop this transport sector here in Sri Lanka. Now, if you think about the present situation, actually people are really not satisfied with the transport sector in the country. So then our ultimate objective is to make happy of the passengers who are using common transport in Sri Lanka. So in order to do that, we have to do a lot. So we sometimes actually, I always appreciate Professor Kumarage because he always encouraging me not to go for the delivery side. Actually now it is fairly okay. But we want to manage the demand. So that's what we want to do. So in order to manage this demand, the transport demand, we need to work with these digital systems. So then that is the lacking part of the Sri Lankan transport. We want to have various kinds of innovative ideas and systems to be incorporated into the transport system here in Sri Lanka using this digital solutions. So that's what my expectation. So delivery side, of course, we can look after, but unfortunately, this linking with new technology takes time. So in order to do that, we are getting ready. We need the support of all of you because as a secretary, so I am a layman, so I am not a specialist. So then I need the specialist contribution into this development process. So that's what I want to mention here. Need to fill this gap. Thank you.
Okay. So Monty, so we are at a tech conference and there's obviously a lot of entrepreneurs logged in today watching this session. I mean, we've noticed that not just the transport ministry, but most of the other government institutes try to do things on their own, right? Now, one is, is there an opportunity for private partnerships? One. Two, how does a tech entrepreneur, maybe someone's watching this on YouTube and wants to, propose a solution. How do they approach the Ministry of Transport and say, hey, you know what? For example, let's take a very simple use case. I want to track the train services through my mobile app. How do we get this? How do we sort of come to you and say, how can we implement this?
You are again talking about the the digital systems to be applied in the train services. So now the situation, you all know the existing situation. So if we want to track the trains, actually we want to use these GPS and all other the stuff with the system. So now we are actually we are going to introduce those sort of systems, but in order to do that, I am really willing to work with the private sector. So if I give a real answer to you with regard to this PPP, actually, so Sri Lankan transport is more than 2/3 of private sector involvements with regard to the passenger transport. So more than 2/3 of the buses are owned by the private sector. That the public sector has only 1/3 of the vehicle, I mean the bus fleet. So then the lacking part is how we incorporate the digital system with the PPP scenario. So that's what the problem arises in with regard to that. So, but anyway, so now we are going to develop these railway system, in particular these stations and the other staffs with the private sector involvement. So now we have already started the process. Probably in a couple of years, we'll be able to get more involvement from the private sector.
Okay. So if an entrepreneur has an idea, can they write to you, Mr. Monty?
With the idea, please ask him to come to me, and I always open my door to this discussions. So then, based on that, we can have, there are some, the government, the rules and regulation. We need to link with those rules and regulation and the private sector requirement. I will be the bridge to link these two and do something what we can do for the betterments of the transport sector here in Sri Lanka.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Monty. So, Professor Amal, again, I like to sort of ask this to you as well, because since you've been, part of public sector before as well, and obviously academia, if I may ask, where are the opportunities in transportation for tech entrepreneurs? Obviously we've seen things happening on ride hailing. What are the other areas that entrepreneurs need to look at?
Everywhere.
Okay.
That's what I said. I mean, people always kind of look at the regulated areas. That was my slide.
Yes.
Industry is wide open, and you have picked, for example, the ride hailing and found a market for yourself. What about cycling? What about freight transport? Things like that. I mean, these are, I think, low-hanging fruits if you want to do that. There's a whole new industry of what we call micro-mobility for short distance, low energy, more active participation. That's actually very popular in Europe and so on. We are not even talking about it. So I think that's open. So the major players, the public transport needed desperately, like Ms. Winnie Wang was saying, that is the iceberg, and we need to help Mr. Ranatunga to, implement this. But there are lots of other things for which we don't need to go to anybody. We just need to have the business model. We need to know how the demand works. We need to know how the supply works, and get it going. Of course, there's a risk. It's a business risk. It's a tech business risk. Yes.
Sure. Okay. Moving to Samita, right? Samita, Professor brought things like micro mobility, and you've seen that in the US, right? Can you just talk about some of the trends that you're seeing, for the interest of the audience?
Sure. So I think when we had to sort of preface this by saying that when we talk about global trends, I think Mr. Kumar again mentioned this. It's not a cookie cutter, right? We can't bring things that work in the rest of the world to Sri Lanka and expect them to work. So yes, we should get sort of motivated by things that are happening elsewhere, but we have to personalize these things to the Sri Lankan context. So starting with micromobility, obviously this has been a sort of growing area for the last 5 to 10 years with bike sharing. That has been a very popular service in many US cities and Europe as well. Even before that, there's a culture of cycling in the US that in Europe that is not present in the US, and also I think to a large extent not present in Sri Lanka. And of course, there are many reasons for this: road conditions, weather, which maybe make it a little bit more difficult. There's electric scooters and electric bikes that are also becoming popular. Again, there's that they can't just be plugged in because we don't have the infrastructure to support them right now in a safe way on the roads in Sri Lanka. An area that has sort of recently been getting a lot of attention is how ride-sharing type technologies can be used to better connect with public transit. So be it taking Pick Me or Uber to a train station or a bus stop, which is sort of maybe the simplest possible way of doing it and perhaps doesn't scale fully. From that, moving towards what's known as microtransit. So basically these are, you can think of it as a Uber bus or Uber shuttle that sometimes takes people from end to end. And again, going back to the comment about how many seats are occupied in a vehicle. Well, if you have a vehicle, a van, let's say, that's moving one person or 10 people, well, if you put 10 people in it, you're taking away potentially 10 cars off the road, right? So there's a big push to try and increase the occupancy of vehicles through these new types of mobility that are sort of a hybrid between transit and ride sharing, ride-hailing apps. And I also want to touch on the comment about innovation. So, innovation has to be also enabled in some way. And one way that's happening, at least in the US context, is through funding to do pilot projects and to sort of accelerate research that will lead to innovations in the sector. So in the US, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, these kind of entities put money in and reasonable amounts of money, significant amounts of money, in the millions of dollars, so that both the research community and industry and the public sector can work together to try things out. Now, these things might not work, they might not be successful, but you learn by making mistakes, right? So if there are ways to do that, I think that would be something that can really kickstart activity in this area. And personally, I work with three different cities. Projects that involve public sector, so the transit agencies, the private sector operators who will run these shuttles and actually build the apps and do things on the ground, and the research community who are coming up with new algorithms and sort of technological solutions to that the companies can then sort of explore in practice. Yes, I think that's something maybe that we can try to do in the context.
Yeah, well. That's very interesting. I mean, a research fund from the government itself for new initiatives. That's fantastic. Winnie, I would like to ask you, you worked in the transport sector in North America, Europe, South Asia. Do you see Sri Lankan transport any different to any other countries you worked in? If so, what are the ways, what are the opportunities do you see?
Thank you, Zulfa. So yeah, I moved to South Asia 2 years ago, but compared to my past experience working in Eastern Europe and North America, one thing very striking to me is how much the private sector is already actively engaged in providing public transport services. Like Secretary Monti mentioned, 2/3 of the bus were operated by private operators, and the three-wheelers, as you see everywhere. Actually, I'm a frequent user of three-wheeler tuk-tuks, which it had some issues, but you have to say it did solve some of the last mile, first mile connectivity issues that some of the public transport cannot provide service in those areas. So that's one unique thing of the strong private sector penetration in the providing public transport services. Another observation is we have a lot of tech startups, including Pick Me, Uber. It's very impressive, and you guys are already concentrated in the market. Also, kind of not only ride sharing, ride hauling, but also kind of fill the gap for some of the areas where public transport services are limited. So these two are the observations, but they also present emerging opportunities for Sri Lanka. In the World Bank, we are currently also promoting this concept of mobility as a service, or short name MaaS. It's basically promoting multimodality and to be more travel oriented, to create a platform or create a marketplace where people can plan their journeys, can make the booking of the trip, can make a payment for both public and private transport services in one place. I think with our strong presence of the private sector in providing mobility services, and the strong ownership and advocacy from the public sector. I think mobility as a service has a great future to be further explored and implemented in Sri Lanka to provide more door-to-door smooth transport services for the users. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So you talked about mobility as a service. In your view of things, how far are we to that kind of an infrastructure or in that kind of a service? Sri Lanka is concerned.
Yeah, it's not really infrastructure oriented. It's more service planning oriented, and it really needs to have an enabling environment from our government counterparts, such as our secretary, to create this kind of enabling environment to allow private and public sector collaboration to bring innovative solutions. As you mentioned, we have those tech companies already, and we have very good data, digital system and internet here. We need to first modernize our public transport system so that they can be digitalized, can be connected with other private sector services. Then we can consolidate them into one-stop service for travelers. I think we are almost there.
Oh, we are.
I hope
wonderful.
during my time we can do something on that. Thank you.
Okay. So that would mean these services will be accessible by way of APIs and things like that, so that we could all connect. Yeah. Is there any frameworks already put out by any of the departments that the tech community can work with?
Yes, I think it's first started in North Europe, and it's also now piloted in the US. Actually, in the World Bank, we are about to publish a white paper on how how to promote mobility as a service. Actually, first also to think what are the key aspects on supply, demand, governance, and technology and finance. All those aspects, key areas that government, private sector both need to think together before fully implementing that. I'm hoping to be able to share the published paper with our counterparts here soon. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So a question coming in from some of the people who are watching this. This is from Mr. Monty. We've heard that the cabinet approved a recent partnership with Lanka Clear on the travel card in partnership with MOT, SLTB, NTC, and People's Bank and all other commercial banks. When will this be launched, Mr. Monty?
So as I mentioned earlier, actually, this is one of the ways how we are going to link with this digital intervention. So then we were discussing for a longer time to, to introduce this e-ticketing system into the transport sector here in Sri Lanka. Now, it has been materialized together with a group of institutions, including Central Bank of Sri Lanka and Lanka Clear as well. So now, probably by Friday, we will be able to sign the agreement, four parties agreement, in order to launch this. And I hope that and also makes the required arrangements to launch this by mid of May. So that's what the plan the ministry has. Mid-May, we will be able to introduce for some of the buses, because most of the bus owners are not ready to, they embrace this because they want to spend some money to purchase these machines, cost machines and all that. But anyway, already we have thousands odd machines used by the NTZ. So then based on that, we will be able to start the process. So
all right. Okay, fantastic. Right. Thank you, Mr. Monty. So we're down to the last 5 minutes, and I thought it'll be good for us to just go around the panel and just have some part away comments. Perhaps if I can ask Mr. Amal, if you can just share some part away comments for this conference and for the people viewing this.
Yeah, for the industry, I think I hope you're convinced that there are many opportunities. But tech alone can't solve this. That's what Professor Samaranayak also underlined. You need to get interested like he has done in networks and mobility. And you have to develop competencies, as I said, internal competencies, or you have to get into partnerships. And that's where, even academia might be useful to get involved in, to see what are the problems, how should the technology be modified to make it successful. And academia also lives in its own ivory towers. So you may need to knock down and find people who are willing to, get their hands dirty with the real world affairs. So, I mean, it's a bit of everybody coming out of their silos. Academia exists for whatever they've been doing. The industry has existed doing whatever but some major issues in society need the participation of all of these. So you need government, you need the researchers, the developers, and you need people who can commercialize it and put it out. So I think you need to sort of think more laterally now, and look at and also World Bank. I mean, for the first time, I think we have a professionally qualified transport planner from the World Bank, with expertise. So I think this is a time that and many development agencies are very happy to just fund huge infrastructure projects. And this kind of sort of dedication to do what matters, I think we need to use and get some of these things. I think the World Bank is also available for working with the private sector. Maybe she can correct me if I'm wrong. And so I think it's a challenge for everybody. And certainly the state has a huge role to play. It's way back in, where it should be. So I think years should be made months, in my opinion, because things are changing so fast, and this is one of the problems that by the time we talk and get something signed and on, it's already not the best in the market. Its life is deemed to be spent. So I think this is also the problem, that we need to pick up the ball when it matters, not 2 years later.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Winnie, over to you. Part away comments.
Thank you so much, Lufa. I think, just taking this event is a great start. We have government decision makers, we have academics, we have developers, researchers, we have private sector from you, and we have development partners from my side. I think this is a great signal that this is a golden time for us to implement some of these big ideas. And I hope we can start this great endeavor together soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Samita.
Yeah. Yes, I think we should have big ideas, but maybe we can also start small. Maybe that's one thing I would say, right? So transportation is a huge sector. There's a lot of infrastructure associated with it. Infrastructure changes are slow, but we can take baby steps towards better utilizing existing infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of places one can innovate. I think I've already seen some sort of modernized private public mass transit systems, bus systems that are going intercity with apps where you can book them and things. There's the whole work transport sector that we didn't talk about, school buses, school vans. There are a lot of sectors where innovation can start. So we should, instead of trying to solve the big problem, we can tackle small pieces to begin with.
Thank you, Samita. Mr. Monty, over to you.
Thank you again for giving this opportunity for me to say something. So actually, we have to do a lot to change the Sri Lankan transport sector. That's what I want to say finally. And in order to do that, actually, so it cannot be done in isolated manner. So need to be we need to have sort of the collaborations and the partnerships, as Professor Kumarage mentioned. So to do that, actually I am here, so I am really willing to give some, the change into this Sri Lankan transport sector with the support of all of you. So finally, I want to say that please be with me and help me to do this, at least to change something in the Sri Lankan transport. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we've got a very informative session, and I want to thank all the panel members who participated. Thank you so much, and for the audience, thank you for connecting. We will now move on to the next session. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.